Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Construct Innovate webinar series on sustainability planning and construction. My name is Jamie Goggins, and I'm co-director of Construct Innovate, which is Ireland's National Research Centre for Construction Technology and Innovation. This is a 7-part webinar series in there, so we're on week 5 now. And today we're going to concentrate on retrofitting homes and businesses. We're very fortunate to have 3 very experienced speakers who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of work in this area. So our first speaker is Dr. Orlaith McGinley, who's a postdoctoral researcher at Construct Innovate, based at the University of Galway, and she's going to talk about the challenges and opportunities of retrofitting homes. We've got Sarah Garry, who's Associate Director at Cushman Wakefield and is also Chair of the Society of Chartered Surveyors of Ireland Sustainability Working Group. And she's led a report on the real costs of retrofitting offices, which she'll present today. Then we have Sinead Hughes, who's Director of Innovation at the Irish Green Building Council. And she led a project called ENACT, which is an SEAI funded project, and it developed a toolkit which is an informed decision-making and streamlining renovation implementation for non-residential buildings. So we're going to have our 3 presenters present their talks first, and then we will have a questions and answers session at the very end. So if you have any questions for any of our 3 speakers, then please do post them in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. As I said, we'll deal with all the questions at the end of the 3 presentations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter being Dr. Orlaith McGinley, who's a postdoctoral researcher in Construct Innovate at University of Galway. She's going to talk about the challenges and opportunities of retrofitting homes. So over to you, Orlaith.
So, hi everybody. As Jamie mentioned, my name is Dr. Orlaith McGinley. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Galway. And today I'll just be talking about some of the challenges and opportunities of retrofitting homes. So retrofitting homes has a key role in achieving emissions reductions in Ireland's built environment. And as such, Ireland's Climate Action Plan set ambitious targets for retrofitting 500,000 homes to a B2 built-in energy rating or better by 2030, alongside the installation of 400,000 heat pumps in existing dwellings. So the chart here shows the progress made to date. So over the last number of years, there have been increases in the number of applications for retrofit grants, the number of retrofits completed, and the number that have achieved a B2 built-in energy rating. But there's still work to be done. And in fact, the Irish Built-in Stock Observatory states that there's almost 685,000 homes listed in the BER database of the Irish housing stock that require retrofitting, having a BER of a B3 or less. And so the SCSI report that the target for retrofit completion in 2025 is to have 64,500 retrofits completed, of which 25,400 are to be a B2 BER better. They're looking to have retrofits in over 7,400 fuel power homes, as well as installing over 5,800 heat pumps as well. So how are we going to achieve it? So the National Retrofit Plan has 4 key pillars, namely driving demand and activity, looking at financing and funding, looking at the supply chain skills and standards, and looking at structures and governance. And under these 4 pillars are various initiatives proposed to support energy retrofit uptake in Ireland. And this includes everything from awareness campaigns, the provision of grants and finance supports, and reviewing existing grant schemes, investigation of alternative funding mechanisms, the establishment of one-stop shop retrofit delivery models, changes in education and training programs, the introduction of supports to encourage upscaling of existing residential retrofit services, looking at standards and guidelines, and also establishing the SCSI as the national retrofit delivery body. So what supports are currently in place for householders specifically looking to retrofit their homes? So for householders, the key supports in place are grant schemes delivered by the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. And that includes the Warmer Home Scheme, which offers fully funded upgrades for eligible householders. The National Home Energy Upgrade Scheme, otherwise known as the One Stop Shop service, which offers a fully managed retrofit service for whole house retrofits. There's the Better Energy Home Scheme, otherwise known as the Individual Energy Upgrades, that offers individual grants for individual measures. And there's also community energy grants as well. In 2024, the SCSI Traditional Homes pilot was introduced that was introduced to enable owners of traditionally built homes in Ireland to avail of grants through the one-stop shop service, as well as the SCSI Home Energy Grant Scheme for homes with defective concrete blocks. As well as the grant schemes, there's also a low-cost loan scheme introduced. So the Home Energy Upgrade Loan Scheme is in place to offer low-cost loans for retrofit projects as well. So despite these supports, it's important to continue to grow the demand for retrofitting. And how the best way to encourage and enable householders to retrofit is to firstly understand the householder retrofit decision-making process and the influences upon it. And also to understand householders' experiences of the retrofit process, as well as the retrofit programs and supports. So a lot of my research has focused on understanding this retrofit decision-making process. This retrofit decision-making process is often highly complex for householders, and it's influenced by a range of factors. So I conducted a review of 164 studies on householder retrofit decision-making, and I identified that around 96 different factors were found to be potential influences in the householder retrofit decision-making process. And these cover 12 key categories that are shown here. That includes everything from physical dwelling factors that relate to the conditions of the systems and components of the dwelling and any physical constraints that might prevent changes to it. It also includes personal factors that relate to the householder's disposition and psychology, as well as their own personal circumstances. We also have external factors that relate to the regulatory and policy environment, as well as the financial incentives that are available. We also have economic factors that relate to the retrofit costs and economic benefits, social impact factors that relate to the social benefits, such as thermal comfort improvements or improved health and well-being. We have environmental factors. There's also implementation factors that relate to the work's implementation itself, so whether that be the disruption that's caused or the availability of installers and so on. There's information factors related to the information content and the accessibility of information. Socio-demographic dwelling and household characteristics also have a role in retrofit decision-making, as do the characteristics of the technologies themselves. So the review that I conducted found that often, despite the broad range of influences on retrofit decision-making, it is often examined through a narrow monetary lens and often supports our financial. Yet these factors are not always the driving force, and it's important, therefore, that we have holistic understandings of retrofit decision-making, particularly looking at the personal factors that are often under-researched but consistently found to be important influences. So, as well as understanding the influences on the retrofit decision-making process, it's also really important to understand that retrofit decision-making is not a static decision. It's actually one that where householders embark on a complicated and lengthy retrofit journey that consists of multiple stages over which the influencing factors vary and change. So that journey begins when people first consider retrofitting. They then progress to planning their retrofits and deciding to retrofit and committing to the works. That's followed by the retrofit implementation stage and the experiencing stage, at which point they might consider to go on and install further upgrades to their home. At any point, householders might face barriers that result in their remaining at any particular stage for an extended period of time. And so it's important that there's supports in place that are based on an understanding of the most prominent barriers and drivers at each stage of the retrofit journey, and that there are support mechanisms in place to encourage stage-to-stage progression through this journey. So while it's important that we encourage and enable householders to retrofit, it's also important that we have the supply side available to meet retrofit demand as it grows. And so the supply side challenge, according to the update to the report of the analysis for skills for residential construction and retrofitting, it estimates that around 79,000 new entrants are required in Ireland's industry to meet the new building retrofit targets by 2030. For retrofitting specifically, that includes a total skills requirement of over 24,000 new entrants. And in terms of the specific needs requirements, well, we need skills in both a technical and professional sense. So that includes everything from an understanding of the fabric first and built-in envelope approaches, looking at heat and hot water and renewable energy system skills, particularly for the installation of heat pumps. We need electrical skills for the integration of PV and controls, We need people in roofing and attic insulation, ventilation designers and installers. We need skills in airtightness testing and remediation. We need retrofit assistants, people in surveying and measurement and finishing trades. As well as that, we need those professional skills in terms of increased numbers of built and energy rating assessors and technical advisors. We need retrofit designers, retrofit supervisors, people in project management. We need traditional building specialists and those in customer engagement roles and those with digital skills as well. So the skills need is really across the board. And the National Retrofit Plan, as I mentioned, focuses various actions on building the supply chain. So that includes everything from conducting skills forecasts and looking at increasing upskilling, reskilling and apprenticeship opportunities in Ireland and focusing on attracting new entrants. As with the demand side, the supply side has its own set of barriers to engagement generally, as well as to upskilling of the existing industry. So these barriers are broad ranging and they span from awareness and knowledge barriers surrounding the upskilling opportunities, negative views of the industry, unalterable practices in the existing industry, maybe perceptions of the difficulty or complexity of working in retrofit projects or working within retrofit grant schemes. There might be poor awareness and knowledge of technological trends and opportunities, lack of depth and breadth in the training that's available. Maybe they don't have the financial resources for training. As well as that, there might be a lack of awareness of the retrofit policy schemes. Maybe people have sufficient demand for the current services, and maybe there's a cost and time commitment there that's also a barrier. So what are the solutions? So if we look at upskilling first, research has identified various ways in which upskilling of the residential retrofit sector can be encouraged or enabled. So these solutions are broad ranging and they include anything from the introduction of incentives, excellence awards or accreditation schemes, maybe implementing mandates for training, having large scale awareness campaigns that promote the industry and demonstrate best practices, looking at opportunities for collaboration and resource sharing, reviewing and changing existing apprenticeship and training courses, ensuring flexible methods of delivery that align with the needs of smaller providers, ensuring that energy efficiency and retrofitting concepts are included as standard, increasing the accessibility of existing courses and establishing training centres, providing funding for the development, setup, infrastructure and training of staff as well for these training centres. And to encourage the existing sector to upscale, research highlights various ways that you could do this. So that includes providing financial incentives for upscaling, for the training of new staff or for the adoption of new practices, providing training or support services to enable existing service providers to upscale, implementing large-scale awareness campaigns, again promoting the benefits of upscaling for the residential retrofit sector, and facilitating collaborative partnerships and joint ventures to allow sharing of resources, expertise and risk sharing. And finally, looking at how we can encourage new entrants. So this includes anything from implementing large-scale awareness campaigns again that communicate the need for installers and guarantees of long-term work in the industry, and promoting diversification in the industry. Establishing clear communication channels that disseminate information on technological trends, advancements of best practices, market opportunities, and policy context. Providing training specifically on the technical requirements of working under policy schemes, and the development of introductory training courses or apprenticeships specifically aimed at new entrants. And in Ireland, actually, steps have been taken to address some of these challenges, particularly surrounding the provision of retrofit training courses. So in particular, there are centres of excellence for nearly zero energy buildings and retrofit training established at various education and training boards across Ireland. And they offer training on the fundamentals, retrofit installation skills, ventilation training, airtightness and vapour control, heat pump installation skills and renewables. There's also a range of retrofit-specific courses at ATU and at TUS as well that are contributing to this challenge. And I'd also just like to highlight there's also other initiatives such as the Mount Lucas National Construction Training Campus have their mobile NZEB and retrofit training rig that delivers retrofit training in different localities. And if anyone's interested in learning more about some of the different types of courses that are available, Innovate has a catalogue of construction and retrofit courses in Ireland published as well. And just also to highlight that in light of the targets for heat pump installation, There's also an incentive scheme introduced for plumbers for the participation in the domestic heat pump installation training courses. So that offers a €500 incentive to offset the cost of taking time off work to attend these training courses as well. So there's been definitely positive steps taken in terms of addressing that supply side challenge. So just for the summary, so the vision is to achieve 500,000 B2B or retrofits and 400,000 heat pump installations by 2030. The National Retrofit Plan outlines the key initiatives for the achievement of this ambition. The demand side supports are there. We have grants and finance available, but it's important that we look at ensuring that supports are centred on a fundamental understanding of the complexity of the retrofit decision-making process and the retrofit journey, and based on an understanding of householders' experiences with existing programmes and supports, they ensure that they are being continually improved and that the customer journey is continually improved as well. Upscaling and engaging new entrants in Ireland's retrofit industry requires a multifaceted approach, given that there's multiple barriers to doing so. The solutions span awareness, recruitment campaigns, training, expansion and development, incentivisation, standardisation, and the incorporation of innovative approaches. There are opportunities there through the NZEB Centres of Excellence, new qualifications and training incentives that are being offered. And coordinated efforts across policy, industry and communities are vital for a clear path forward for achievement of Ireland's retrofit targets. And success requires collaboration, innovation, and ultimately an understanding of the people and the systems involved. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Orla. So great there to present like not just what are the challenges, but also the opportunities as well. So it's one thing putting out challenges there, but then what are the opportunities? And it's another thing also the government kind of setting targets, these very ambitious targets around retrofitting and installation of heat pumps, but there is no hope that you can achieve targets without putting incentives and making opportunities for people. And you can see there the wide range of financial incentives are there, both from especially on the demand side, from the homeowners or the occupants that can avail of grants and that, but also then on the supply side to make sure we can upskill and upscale on the supply side with all those training programs. And a lot of those training programs that Orla presented are available for free as well, because a lot of them are subsidised or heavily subsidised as well. So if you Google or do a search for Construct Innovate, a catalogue of retrofitting courses, you will find a whole range of courses there available and gives you details about what level they're at and where they are and so on and that. So if anyone's any questions for Orla, please do pose them in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll deal with all those questions at the very end of the presentation. So put them into the Q&A function rather than the chat function, please. Okay, so with that, now I'm going to move on to our second presenter, over to Sarah Garry, who's Associate Director of Cushman Wakefield and is Chair of the Society of Chartered Surveyors of Ireland Sustainability Working Group and lead author on the report on the real cost of retrofitting offices that was recently published. So over to you, Sarah.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much to Jamie and the team at Construct Innovate for having me this afternoon. So my name is Sarah Garry, and as Jamie said, I work in the Valuations and Advisory Department of Cushman Wakefield in our Dublin office. My other hat that I wear is the new chair of the Sustainability Working Group within the Society of Chartered Surveyors. And we would work very closely with a lot of the different disciplines within the SCSI. So the Society of Chartered Surveyors this year produced another edition in relation to their retrofitting series. So it was the real cost of retrofitting. It was analysis of the retrofitting of office blocks and the viability of such. So if we just pop on to the next slide there. Was published just at the start of the summer this year. So an awful lot of you on the call will be very aware of what the Society of Chartered Surveyors do. And there's over 6,500 members throughout the country, and it's all disciplines from building surveying to quantity surveying, planning and development, geomatics, all the way down to commercial agency, valuation, and as far as arts and antiquities surveyors. So they've quite a broad reach in their member base, and through that, a lot of the working groups, we have access to an awful lot of expertise, areas that people are working in at the moment, and they feed into our research. So the next slide there, please, Kaja. So why did we decide to do this? So offices, as most of you will know, are probably the main asset class at the moment in commercial property that are really having a very hard time of it in relation to ESG and sustainability. They're definitely been hit harder than retail or industrial at the moment, and it's really feeding into and affecting the values. This initial real cost report was, I think, supposed to be initially a QS-led report, and when we all started feeding into the research, we realised quite heavily that actually the QS report and the cost consultancy piece was extremely important, but it was dovetailed with the valuation piece, and I suppose that's the part that I'll be talking to you today. I'm not going to pretend to be any sort of quantity surveyor or cost consultant. So in relation to the research and the reach that this project had, we asked a lot of our members who were working on retrofitting projects of offices, would they go out, have a look at what they worked on, what the building was like beforehand, and what the cost analysis was to get a building from X BER to Y. And what we did was we decided, right, why are we doing this in the first place? So the retrofitting core strategy is really the main way to march towards decarbonisation. We can't get away from it. Commercial properties are facing increasing pressure with all of the EU legislation coming down the road, as well as domestic legislation. So a lot of companies in this country would have fallen into the net of CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive. And we've got the Energy Efficiencies Directive. We've got the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, etc. So there's EU taxonomy. There's a whole host of this legislation coming down the track. So some are regulation and some are directives. So they're to be implemented into everything that we're doing. And each of these bodies of legislation is bringing with them benchmarks as to where they say either real estate landlords, professional or corporate landlords, need to be in relation to their reporting and their responsibilities, but also where the buildings need to be performing at and what the minimum performance, what's going to be acceptable. So there's a very interesting and meandering chronology of all of these directives and regulations coming down the tracks. So yes, a lot of the larger funds would have ESG and sustainability departments, but then there's the next tier down of landlords and property owners that don't necessarily have huge ESG-led teams to be able to tell them exactly what's coming down the road. So what we looked at was, we thought, right, what we need to do is we need to get professional groups together. So we got professional QSs and cost consultants together, and then we got valuation surveyors together. So in these groups of professionals, it wasn't run by any one person, and it was absolutely group fed. So the QS data was compiled by Anthony Clunan of Cogent, and then I worked with the group of valuers that came together. So by all means, it's not my research. I just collated a lot of the work on it. So everybody who fed into this project in relation to costings, they were real life projects that we looked at. We had professionals from private practice and public bodies all feeding in, so that there was a broad range of opinions and knowledge all collated together to give an overview. So if we pop on to the next slide there, please, Kaja. Thank you so much. So the basis really of the report and the objective was to give this comprehensive overview of the exact cost of retrofitting based on real life examples and real life case studies. So we went into the detail and examined the retrofitting costs of the various assets that came back to us. And then at the end of that, then we hope to make a recommendation at the end of the report. So just on to the next one, please. So when we were looking at the costings and the methodology, we looked at it on a like-by-like basis, which obviously, as you know, is extremely hard to do with any commercial property. Every property is different. It's in a different location. You've got different scenarios, tenanted or not tenanted or partly tenanted. How old is the building? What's the makeup of the building? Has it been retrofitted at all? Is it coming from the baseline when it was PC'd initially? And what level of retrofit that we were going to bring the buildings to and from. So we looked literally just at the hard costs as to what these physical costs were going to be. So we excluded things like value engineering, and we excluded the soft costs such as professional fees and the cost of finance. We pop on to the next one, please, Kaja. So we got all of the data together. I'll probably come back to this slide a little bit later. And so it was a before and after piece. So we'll move on to the next one. So we got 13 case studies back in total, but 7 of them we were able to compare like with like. So we took these individual office buildings from a baseline that they all had vacant possession. So already we were discounting any sort of tenant income or having to give notice or having to get vacancy in the building. So of the 7 case studies that we had, there was a big range in age of the buildings. So some of the buildings were only 20 years old and it ranged up to about 65 years old. They all had complete differences in their BERs before and after and what they hoped to achieve. There was also a large chasm of difference between the floor areas. So obviously when we were looking at costs, we looked at the gross floor areas. And then when we were looking at the valuation piece to apply rent and yields, we were looking obviously at the net internal area as you do with offices. So all of these examples were based in Dublin. So as I said, we distilled it down to 7 case studies. So they also had varying condition, as you can see the second column from the right. Some of them were in fair condition, mostly good condition, and then there was a building there, case study 6, that was really in quite poor condition. 2 of the properties were in Dublin 1, 3 of the case studies were in Dublin 2, and then we had an example from the north and south suburbs, so from Glasnevin and then Blackrock in the south Dublin suburbs. So what we looked at, I suppose, if you look at the BER change, as valuers, this is a great benchmark for us as to the performance of a building. So you can see that in case study number 2, the change and the costs associated with same were to get a building with the BER rating up to an A3, which is quite a significant jump. Case study number 2 was to go from a D2 to an A3. But then as you move down the table, you can see they don't all jump up to an A. So whether the funding was there or not, or they just wanted to achieve a certain level, each case study was different. And I suppose that's why it made it really interesting to us. As you can see, case study 7 on the bottom is moving from an E1 to a C1. So if we are to take a step back and look at this in relation to the pillar banks in Ireland, I'm pretty sure that a B3 is now your minimum acceptable rating for green lending or green finance. So this building obviously went up to a C1. So that's interesting. They didn't just bring it up to the next level of having a BER starting with a B. So if we pop on to the next one, please. So in relation to the costings, our QSs and our cost consultants and our building surveyors and our project managers went out with this costing survey. So this is only a snippet. It was about 4 pages long and it was broken into different elements. There were obviously there was the external cost in relation to building wrapping, stairs, lifts, fenestration, internal walls, finishes of walls. So it went into a lot of detail in relation to the scope of works and exactly what each of these was going to cost. And as I said, these are real life examples. So it was really worthwhile when we were able to compare like by like to see the huge differences. The rest of the costings are actually set out in the SCSI report, which I know Kaja in Construct Innovate is going to send an email afterwards. So the link for the report will be there. But it was quite detailed and it was quite interesting to see the different costings for the different buildings. So if we pop on to the next one. Thank you. So I'm not even going to pretend that I know what each of these sections were made up by, but I suppose something that was quite interesting to me is if you look at each of these columns, The grey section, the grey piece in each of the columns, was in relation to the external enclosures or the wrapping, the external works on the buildings. And we found this quite interesting because case study A, which is the first column on the left, has quite proportionately a lot of the costings within the cost for the upgrade and the retrofit there. The largest proportion was not actually the external enclosure, which can be quite pricey, and that building was about 60 years old. So you can see with the components of the internal finishes and the completions, building repairs, demolition, preliminaries, external enclosures, the first building in case study A, which was about 9,000 square meters in size, it came to a total of €917 per square meter to retrofit that building. Whereas rather interestingly, if you skip to the one directly beside it, which was case study 2, it was an 18,000 square meter size building, but it was only 20 years old. And yet the costing to get to from their D to their A3 was quite a considerable jump. And there was quite a considerable jump in ratio or proportionate cost of the overall in the grey section, which was the external enclosures. So if you actually just step back and have a look at each of those bars for each of the 7 case studies that we look at, there is absolutely no uniformity whatsoever in the main ratios or components of the costs for the building, which we found quite incredible. Now, they are all moving from a baseline BER to varying levels, but the cost does seem to jump up quite significantly when you start to get to the high Bs and into the As. But this was a really interesting part for us as valuers, because when we go back and we're advising clients in relation to, well, what's it going to cost to retrofit the building? This is a very clear example of, well, there's no set cost. The building is going to have to be analysed independently. Excuse me. So if we pop onto the next slide, please. So what we did with this information and the costings was then, as valuers, once the QSs and the building surveyors and cost consultants had collated all that information and broken it down for us, we wanted to look at the figures. And as valuers, I often joke that we think we're the most important people in the room, because if you can't get finance to do a project, you can't sell it, you can't knock it, you can't retrofit it, you pretty much can't refinance it. There's not an awful lot you can do if the business case doesn't stack up. So what we did was, again, it's I suppose a basic table here just for a quick view. You can see the retrofit expenditure cost is the third row across. So the costings were absolutely hugely different across each of the buildings for the input costs. And what we did then was we took the before value of where we deemed the value of the building was beforehand, before any of the works were done with the original BER and sustainability features. And then we looked at where the value points would move after these works were done. So you can see across the board, there was a huge increase in the change, the estimated change in values, which is in the green box towards the lower part. It's the first of the dark grey strips across the centre there. So there was a huge change, an estimated change in the values of the property. In case study 5, you can see there was a massive jump by 122%. So we looked at the next row underneath in relation to the potential change in rent. And interestingly, case study 4, you'll notice that there's actually no change to the rent whatsoever. And that's based just on the location of this particular building being extremely central. But it's an outlier, and we've left it in there just to show that. But in most cases across the table, you can see there's an uplift in value from about 20% up to as far as 60%. So, sorry, the rental income, I should say. So the improvement in yields were across the board. And you can see that in the second of the dark grey strips across the centre. And what we did was, after we analysed the value of the building beforehand and the value of the building afterwards, after the improvements were done, we then took the cost of those works and we compared them against the uplift in the value to show our business case. So when we're going back to clients and we're saying you should do this with your building, there always has to be a business case as to why you should do it. So if you look at the very bottom section of this table, you can see that in only 3 of the 7 case studies, there was a business case to do the works. if we pop on to the next one, please, Kaja. So where did we find the differences? So this is extremely hard for us as valuers to go back to clients and say, well, actually, it's going to cost you X to do the works and your value is only going to be increased by Y. So in a lot of cases, when we're looking at the cost for retrofit and upgrade, they don't always stack up. So what were the value improvements that we saw as valuers? So once the works were done and the buildings were upgraded, we would see an improvement in the rents across the board. We'd see an improvement in the yield, the investment yield that's been applied to that building. And your yield obviously is your risk factor, and it's how you assess your risk on that building and your income. We saw a reduction in the voids. So the voids essentially are the amount of time between lettings. How long is your building going to be sitting there without having somebody to tenant it, without you having an income essentially on it? And as many of you will know, there are often incentives offered to new tenants when they're taking a new letting. So we saw that the incentives would be reduced. So these incentives can be by way of capital contribution or a rent-free that's afforded to a tenant to, I suppose, lessen the burden on them of cost when they're moving in. So they're reduced. The likelihood of longer lease terms was definitely apparent. There was a higher chance of obtaining a single tenant and a higher chance of obtaining a better covenant of tenant. And the reason for that is a lot of tenants who want to take large buildings are larger companies that have their own ESG and sustainability goals and their own mandates that they have to adhere to. And a lot of these companies that are generally taking office buildings of that size as a single tenant, they can't now take buildings that are not deemed as sustainable or ESG friendly, or they're breaching their own mandates internally. So you're likely going to have, in a lesser performing building, more tenants per floor. So by upgrading, we said there was a higher chance of a single tenant and a better covenant of tenant. We also spoke earlier about green finance. So if you are bringing your building up to a B or higher, you should have access, in theory, to green finance, especially with the Pillar Bank here in Ireland. I think, as I said, a B3 is probably the lowest ebb of the BER that they'll accept for a building to be deemed green or sustainable. And then, of course, you're reducing your chance of obsolescence of that building. So if your building is deemed sustainable, it's attractive to tenants, you're going to have strong rental income on it, your yield is going to support the good income on it, you're going to have very little time of having the building empty, and you're going to have given the tenant a lot less to move in and use your building. Obviously, it's all feeding into a good news story. If we pop on to the next one, please, Kaja. So I suppose when we're approaching clients, how do we say, well, it's going to cost you X, you might not get a return on it? It's the first time in my lifetime as a valuer that I've seen that the business case or that the figures not stacking up essentially aren't the most important thing here. As we've already talked about, the legislation coming down the road is benchmarking exactly where these buildings need to be and what the minimum performance for these buildings is. So there's really no way around it. I know Sinead is going to speak after me, Sinead Hughes from the Irish Green Building Council, and I know Dr. Orlaith McGinley has spoken before me about, I suppose, recommendations or grants or supports that are available to people out there, which I think is really important. But the key recommendations at the back of this report was just a greater emphasis on the fabric first within state grants. So that was the grey piece that we were talking about in the bar charts, to try and increase the air tightness and the overall performance of the buildings, which can be a huge cost just to get it to that level. Lease guidance, so going to find a professional advisory, and not only around the value piece, but also from the QS and your cost consultant. So really getting the best knowledge that you can around your building, having building management systems in place, certifications and grants, anything that's available to you. Do try and do your research so that you can advise your clients of everything that's available to them, because the cost can be quite prohibitive. And then obviously the market data then is within the report. So that's everything from me. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to take questions afterwards, but I'm also happy to pass back to Jamie. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. That's great, and it's very helpful to be able to get a number of cases to be able to compare across against each other. We might delve into that in a little bit more detail when we get into the Q&A session in there. So We're over to our third speaker now. Third speaker is Sinead Hughes, who's Director of Innovation at the Irish Green Building Council, and she's going to present around the ENACT toolkit that was developed through an SCSI funded project and is there to help you on your journey around the renovation implementation of non-residential buildings. So over to you, Sinead.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, everyone. Is that in present screen mode? Can you see that okay?
Yep, perfect.
Great. Thank you so much. So delighted to be here today representing the Irish Green Building Council. I'm going to present, I suppose we're talking about commercial renovation, so I'm going to present an SCSI funded project looking at the issue of commercial renovation specifically focusing on SMEs. We did this project in partnership with, great to see Sarah again, Society of Chartered Surveyors. Sustainability Works assisted us in looking at the financial mechanisms around the issue. University of Galway and colleagues there through Construct Innovate, looking at the behavioural change side of things, and Dublin Chamber assisted us with outreach into the SME networks. So the focus of the project was really to look at the technical, financial and behavioural barriers regarding commercial renovation, and to look at the numerous different types of projects and the typologies within the commercial sector. So obviously Sarah spoke earlier about the office sector, specifically those case studies, but we were trying to just broaden the conversation to other typologies. I suppose we talk about renovation and what exactly are we talking about? There's a list there on, I suppose, the typical measures we would look at, and the blue items would really be that fabric first. Or I suppose in the residential area, it tends to be a fabric first focus. In commercial, there are huge gains for those initial shallow or medium renovation options in terms of energy reduction. I suppose critically to understand what is not energy renovation in terms of general projects that might not necessarily look at the thermal or operational side of things. So, and then there's obviously issues to consider in terms of the condition and equipment, lifespan, etc. of your properties. I suppose critically within the SME, because we were looking at the different typologies, different building types, different businesses have different challenges. Just looking at warehouse there, perhaps the lighting outlet outcomes are more critical versus a hotel or leisure, whereas the hot water is where there's huge cost implications. So in terms of energy renovation, it really is critical to understand what is specific to your sector and indeed to your building type. Again, we were focusing on SMEs, so we put ourselves in the place of SMEs, and there are already multiple challenges. Some statistics here about within a smaller business, they don't have an ESG, consultant or expert, they don't have a sustainability advisor. They're managing many issues, and maybe the operations of their buildings is the last thing on their list. So really, how can we support and enable more commercial renovation when there's already so many challenges within the SME sector? So to look at the positives, I suppose we did look at a number of case studies. Society of Chartered Surveyors assisted us with that, and the potential for broader benefits and the opportunities, I suppose, to see it as an opportunity for your business. Embedding a new culture is key, and not to just see this as an initial cost issue. There's actually a broader benefit, which I'll just delve briefly through in a moment. So in those findings, similar to Dr. Orla earlier referring to the barriers, drivers and benefits, we broke our research into looking at the technical side of things, financial side of things and behavioural. And I think our colleagues in the University of Galway would say there was a substantial amount of issues around behavioural change and the behavioural side to prompt more commercial renovation. So technical challenges, I suppose, are obviously the fabric and the equipment and understanding as I say, your building or your actual sector issues. The financial is obviously that upfront CapEx initially, and behavioural, the issue of split incentives being the issues regarding owners and occupiers and who benefits, who pays, and what's the reality of that on the ground. The drivers, again, I think it's been mentioned in terms of legislation, but it's the value associated with these lower performing assets. There's a reduction on that, and seeing what the reality can be in terms of improving that. The drivers would be energy costs. I think that has prompted the works to date, albeit we still need significantly much more to be done in terms of meeting our national targets. And the behavioural, improving employee and staff and customer well-being when improving your property. That's another driver from the behavioural change perspective. Benefits, again, same categorization here as has been mentioned before. I suppose it's that future-proofing of your property in terms of regulatory requirement and accessing green finance. Energy cost certainty, in some cases, cost neutrality, or even being able to give back energy to the grid or to a charity. There are a lot of benefits from a financial perspective. And then behavioural, again, just a few jumping out there, improve competitiveness from a branding perspective on your business. So really, I suppose the overall findings of the ENACT project was really that we collectively need to be doing more in terms of raising awareness and not just seeing this as an energy efficiency conversation. There is very much a broader context. We need to be providing more supports, financial, but also technical, and as Orla mentioned earlier, that upskilling need to be incentivizing and indeed mandating more supports to encourage more commercial renovation, and to really assist those SMEs in I suppose in nudging behavioural change when it comes to commercial renovation. So in terms of all of these findings, we grouped everything together to try and promote more awareness and supports. So I'll just delve a little bit deeper. In terms of the awareness, looking at the value to your staff and customers, the property value, the financial value, and the business value. Again, you'll have these slides afterwards. You can delve a little deeper into this. And critically, I mean, we talk about the BER and the energy rating of the asset or the building, but really we need to also focus on the actual energy use. In that example there, the CSO statistics highlight that in this example, the BER A and B buildings are actually using more energy. So it's really how a building is being occupied, especially if there's hybrid working, how is the energy being tracked and monitored and appropriate to the actual energy use. There are huge benefits to be garnered there. So it's really to combine looking at the building and the asset rating and the actual energy operational side of things. In terms of what's being called the split incentives, again, our language and our resources that I'll share with you now is really looking at owners and occupiers rather than tenants and landlords. We're trying to promote a more collegiate relationship and to deliver shared benefits. So we encourage owners to start speaking with their occupiers and looking at measures for joint benefits, and equally for occupiers to begin a conversation with your owner, start sharing data, and not to see this as a negative, but to actually see this as a joint opportunity for more efficiency within the property. Legislative context, and Sarah mentioned, just to mention, just particularly the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, to flag that in the legislation being transposed into an Irish context next May, processes such as minimum energy performance standards, that there will be buildings out there currently that will be in that lower performing stock, and the concern about those being stranded assets. So it's almost like getting ahead of the legislation that is coming, looking at zero emission buildings as opposed to nearly zero energy buildings. So it's really to look at that broader carbon, lower carbon opportunities. I'm going to use that word, opportunities. And the processes for that, one-stop shops being information hubs, green finance supporting nationally to achieve our national targets. And then the CSRD was just mentioned briefly. But again, if you're in that supply chain, I know the omnibus was issued, but it's really to try and get ahead from a brand and marketing perspective, in addition to those energy and carbon reductions. So the supports, we speak about the grants that are available within our suite of resources. We also look at other financial methodologies, I suppose, and access to green finance. So again, I'll show the QR code for the resources at the end of the presentation. Interestingly, the SCSI Business Energy Upgrade Scheme that was released, it's actually a year ago now, looks at individual measures, and critically, there's a grant available for technical assistance. So that's an important that you really are getting correct advice for your particular building typology. Oh, sorry. In addition to supports, just to prompt our audience to consider decarbonisation through circularity. So the same way that you might rent your printer or rent your equipment within a building, to actually start taking that approach for the fabric elements. So maybe it's energy as a service or your lighting as a service, and that you're looking at the full life cycle of the equipment and the operations from a circularity perspective, and that also promotes getting higher quality performing equipment within your building. So there is a value in that from a circularity perspective, and indeed the green finance can support that because you're considering the full life cycle of your business. In technical supports, we in Irish Green Building Council, we would be strongly recommending, particularly with the more historic fabric, that you have an appropriately skilled advisor advising on our renovation. The biggest concern we would have nationally is that we would have to retrofit our retrofits. So really, we really need to be appropriate and looking at appropriate measures depending on the particular fabric that we have, and sharing our learnings across sectors. So what is it that I'm talking about, this ENACT project? Our colleagues at Construct Innovate are hosting our resources. Essentially, it's a web page on ENACT, on Construct Innovate. It is a suite of resources. We have a decision-making tool, a financial navigator tool. We have a suite of case studies that we've delved into in terms of the energy efficiency measures that have been carried out to different projects within a broad cohort of typologies. So we have an advice guide, and at a very simple level, if you are an SME, within the advice guide, it just promotes messaging around why energy efficiency matters for your buildings, what are the steps to take, and that aligns with SCSI grant steps. So there's a clear sequence of measures to assist you on your journey. What is the value of the action, key sustainability jargon. I mean, there's a lot of directives and EU legislation and then national initiatives. So it's really to kind of understand and simplify the messaging and climate literacy around the topic. And then the legislation and standards, I mean, what it means for you as in terms of your business operations. Again, to really strongly reiterate our language around owners and occupiers and the value of jointly looking at these issues together for both parties, for the benefit of both parties, and then obviously to reduce our emissions ultimately at national and then international global level. The business case, this is an important document. The finance guide, that's just sort of the contents list there. It really highlights the business case of the energy efficiency measures. And in terms of the grants that are available, there are other smart finance options that it depends on your own business operations. But really, there's a whole suite of advice there on just broadening your outlook. There are further finance options available. If you look at the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, they have a green checker eligibility, really that the measures you're adopting are in line with European legislation. So there's a suite of opportunities out there, and it's just sort of this finance guide was really trying to assist if you're looking at this as an SME on your, by yourself, to assist in that regard. And then this is just a screen grab of a project we're working on with some French partners. That's why it's in France. And IES at a national level in Ireland. It's a renovation passport project to really look at, you may not complete all your renovation steps all at once, but at least if you have that roadmap, as they say, in this example, it's moving from a B or D to a C and to a B, and it's capturing the steps along the way and what that might do. And again, that there might be a value associated with that, as Sarah said, from a valuation perspective. So happy to chat with anyone about that separately if needs be. So finally, I'm really sincerely hoping that QR code works. But the ENACT resources, as I said, it's that decision-making tool, and the finance tool is on the webpage. There are recorded webinars delving a bit deeper into some of the research that was carried out. The advice guide I've flagged to you there. And then the case studies, they are grouped according to typology, and you can see what other similar businesses have done if you see yourself in that suite, and then the financial handbook. So thank you so much for listening. Bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope there was something there to prompt and whet your appetite. So thank you, everyone.
Brilliant, thanks, Sinead. And again, if you do a search for ENACT, Retrofit, Construct, Innovate, you'll find that online as well. So if anyone has any questions for any of our three presenters.